Anyone can tell you the news.
We welcome Diamond and Silk.
Mark Zuckerberg will end up, and it's going to be a face without the book.
Book without the face.
Hey, Megan, how are you?
Breaking news, a school shooting with reports of multiple fatalities.
He had ran up to me and yelled at me to give me my purse.
A warning for online shoppers tonight. A new scam that could steal your personal information in just a matter of seconds.
Breaking news, a deadly carjacking in Woodland Hills.
Tonight, police in Lancaster, Texas have identified a possible suspect who investigators say pointed a gun at a passing car.
Hello, this is Michael Hart, and you're listening to the Situational Security Broadcast edition of the Michael Hart Show right here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network. Let me give you a quick little backgrounder on today's broadcast. About 2-3 weeks ago, we were having a conversation with a gentleman by the name of Kevin Reeve of On Point Tactical. And I've had the opportunity to interview Kevin in the past, not just a couple of 3 weeks ago, but even prior to that, on the terrestrial signals as well as the podcasting platforms. During the course of the conversation, I had made a comment, and this was very late in the broadcast. I had made a comment about an event that took place in Birmingham, Alabama, that is relatively close to the broadcast facility from which we are coming to you live. And this has to do with a shooting which took place in a mall. And the mall shooting, and I know a lot of you guys are local, but for the purposes of those that are outside the market, we had a shooting where there was an officer involved. We had a young black man that was mistakenly shot. He was not the perpetrator. This inspired some local protests that went on not only in this mall, but strip malls in the area. A country club got hit, a couple other places as well. During the course of our conversation with Kevin, I made a comment that although I was not at most of these protests, I did actually encounter one across a parking lot. And I thought I was being a little bit vague, but I made the comment that it seemed to me that I could sense something was going on the other side of this mall parking lot, despite the fact I didn't really know what it was at the time until I investigated it. That stimulated a conversation where Kevin brought to light something that he called a situational baseline and concentric rings. And that is not just a matter of a protest in a mall, but whether or not it be in some kind of an urban setting or suburban setting, or for that matter, even wilderness setting. As I have shared with you guys many times over the years, I love the outdoors. I love to camp. I'm a pretty accomplished camper. I'm a former Boy Scout leader, and I know my way around the woods pretty well. Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say that I know how to, turn bark into filet mignon, but I can survive in the woods, at least until somebody shows up, St. Bernard with the rum on his collar. But either way, so we are always in these situations each and every day. And one of the things that we wanted to get into with Kevin today is talking about situational baselines, concentric rings, and how we can tell if whatever environment we are in is not necessarily about to become volatile, but certainly perhaps a little bit more threatening than what the situational baseline would suggest. And with that said, we welcome Kevin Reeve of On Point Tactical back to this edition of Situational Security, brought to you by Heart of America. Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
Good morning. How you doing?
Doing just fantastic. Got a little bit of the holiday hangovers, so to speak, but we are back in the saddle again. Kevin, as is often the case in all the years that I've been doing talk radio in one form or another, my interview style, as you're well aware, is very conversational. I don't even have a single question in front of me because I already knew where this conversation was going to go today. But the last time you and I talked, as is oftentimes the situation in any conversation, it eventually took on kind of a life of its own, and we started to get into some of the real what I would consider, almost emotional minutia, if you will, of staying secure in our environment, and we didn't have the opportunity to flesh it out. And I know that you wanted that chance, and I certainly wanted to hear it as well. You brought up the issue of what you call situational baselines, and I'm just going to kind of turn it back over to you and just let this conversation flow naturally.
All right. Well, you mentioned something at the start of the broadcast that I think is really important, and that is that we live in a world with predators, two-legged predators, and we have to pay attention because the world is not becoming safer every day. The world is becoming more and more dangerous every day. I mean, there's always something new going on, from muggings to carjacking to terrorism. There are plenty of threats in the urban environment. I was just watching a newscast about homelessness in Los Angeles. They estimate there are 60,000 people living on the streets of LA. That's a conservative estimate. Not that the homeless people are a threat, but they are a part of that fabric, and that baseline includes people who are mentally ill sometimes, who are drug-addled, and they can be a danger. But there's also just your grade A run-of-the-mill muggers or shooters or terrorists, or there's all kinds of threats. And it can be overwhelming because the urban environment is such a complex and densely populated area. So how do you pay attention in that area without losing your mind? And that's kind of where we want to go today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it certainly does, because like I said, I'm bringing kind of a real-world observation into this discussion because I didn't really know what was going on. It's just like, I know you do a lot of wilderness stuff, and, I love getting out in the woods, and I'm one of those kind of guys that I have no problem going camping alone because I just like kind of communing with nature, if you will. But, when you're out in the woods and it's perfectly quiet, sometimes you get this sense that something is just not right. Maybe it's a predator or an animal coming up on you. Maybe it's a storm. But something is just, and I'm also an avid boater. And so, every once in a while you'll get into these situations on the water even where the skies are crystal clear and the water is blue. The next thing you know, you see lightning in the distance and you got a problem on your hands. And it's so interesting how you kind of sense these things prior to witnessing these things. And so I'm curious if there's a way that we can kind of teach ourselves to attune to it, because before you answer, I want to go back to something you said last week or 2 weeks ago, and then you brought it up again today about the total number of people that are homeless in this country. But then you made a comment the last time we were together that we are only 9 meals away. I believe the way you put it was 9 meals away from anarchy. If you look at the homeless population in our urban centers and the fact that they may not be 9 meals away from anarchy, or 9 meals, 9 meals removed from their last meal, but they're certainly hungry, and that creates, a potentially volatile situation. And that's just one example. I'm not pointing back towards homeless people.
Sure.
I'm simply making the point that I don't think the average guy on the street realizes the enormous threat that most of us live in the presence of every single day.
Right. And that's really at the heart of what I want to discuss today is how do you stay ahead of those events? How do you protect yourself from a personal perspective, and then from a larger community situation? So while you're standing at the ATM, how do you maintain your awareness so that somebody doesn't come up behind you and put a knife at your neck and make you take your money out and all that kind of stuff? And as well as that, how do you deal with a disruption in the delivery of goods and services that will result in that kind of anarchy that we're talking about? So how do you pay attention in a very complex environment? And it is a challenge. There's so much sensory input that if you're not careful, you can get easily overwhelmed by it.
So what kind of strategies can we employ? What kind of things are there markers? Because it almost sounds, I think, to the average listener that we're talking about employing some sense of extrasensory perception or something here. But I would think I would think that there are certain things that you can just be topically aware of in any situation.
Yeah, and that's where we go. What you have to figure out is the concept of baseline is very important. What you have to figure out is what the baseline is for a given area. Baseline means normal state. It means what is it like when nothing in particular is happening. It refers to noise and activity level, movement, all kinds of different indicators of that baseline. And if you can monitor the baseline, you don't have to monitor everything. You just have to pay attention to what is that normal noise and activity level. Now, when there's a variation to the baseline, it usually is a predatory situation. Some kind of predator is moving in the environment. In the wilderness, when I'm out in the woods and I'm sitting carefully listening, sitting in a secluded spot, just enjoying myself like you were describing, I hear a sudden disruption in the language of the birds. The birds are an indicator that tell me that there's a predator in the area, and so the same kind of thing happens in the city. There's a disruption to that noise and activity level that tells me there's a predator somewhere, some kind of thing happening. We call those disturbances concentric rings, and they radiate out in a concentric pattern away from the source of the disturbance. And if you are paying attention, then you can trace the concentric rings back to their source. So what we're talking about is pattern recognition, paying attention to what is normal so you recognize variations to normal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So let me break this down just for the ridiculous. So if I'm walking across a parking lot and, all is well and I'm just going to go ahead and unload my groceries or whatever, and then 4 or 5 cars away from me, all of a sudden a car alarm will go off. And, it's a false alarm, but the car alarm is going off. Would that be something that would, disrupt the baseline? And I'm making this analogy because I want people to understand the kind of things we might be looking for, that there's the immediate shock of the alarm going off and somebody else is shocked by the alarm going off, and across the mall parking lot, it's obviously much quieter, but somebody can hear it over there. So all of a sudden the baseline, I guess it's the sanctuary baseline, has been disturbed. Is that kind of what we're referring to in a basic level?
Good term, sanctuary baseline. Yeah, that's exactly it. The whole idea of car alarms was to create a concentric ring, a disturbance in the baseline. Most of us now just have learned to ignore them because they're so frequent.
Right.
And that happens a lot to us. Whatever our baseline is it becomes very easy for us to just not pay a whole lot of attention to it. So it takes consciousness. It takes a decision to be present when you're in the public space. That I think is very, very important. So it all starts with a choice. It starts with a choice or a decision to pay attention to what's going on around you. We get wrapped up in what happened yesterday, what's going to happen tomorrow, and we lose track of what's going on around us right now. That is the very nature of our society. There are so many demands on us mentally and emotionally that we get caught up kind of playing these tapes in our head rather than paying attention to what's going on around us. And a lot of people get surprised that way. Predators are looking for people who are not paying attention.
Is it a fair statement? Because I'm starting to kind of really grasp this. It would seem to me that the majority of people, whether consciously or not, are monitoring the baseline, although they might not be doing it to the level or degree that we're suggesting. And what I'm talking about here you're walking down a sidewalk, you're paying attention to the traffic, you see the traffic crossing signal, you know if somebody's coming your direction so you don't bump into them, not necessarily in a predatory situation, but you're in this constant state of kind of monitoring where you are. And then there's that jackaloon kid that steps off the curb because he's looking at his iPhone and gets hit by a bus because he wasn't monitoring the baseline. So we're talking about something along those lines, correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. A lot of people fly on autopilot. You know, they essentially put their earbuds in, they listen to their music, and they just aren't paying any attention to the signs in the environment that something is changing. And so they get overwhelmed or surprised by it. You get hit by the bus. You get mugged because you're an easy mark. Just a real quick story. I was riding on a train in Chicago. One of the L trains out of the downtown area, and I was heading towards the west side. I got onto a car, and there was only one other passenger in the car, and it was a young woman who was probably in her early 20s, sitting with earphones in her ears and her smartphone in front of her, and she was scrolling, flipping through pictures and checking her status and all this stuff, and she was completely oblivious to anything else going on around her. And I thought, wow, she is such a target. And then within about 5 minutes of the next stop, within about 5 minutes, two guys came in and sat down at the end of the train, end of the car. And I was at the opposite end and she was in the middle. And I looked at them and I realized that they were going to mug her. They were going to, and I could just see it in their behavior. The way they were paying attention, the way they were shooting it up, they started sliding down a few seats and getting closer and closer. And it was very obvious to me that she was about to become a victim. And she had no idea this was playing out. So I got up and went and sat directly across from her, which kind of startled her. And she's thinking, what is this guy doing? And I made direct eye contact with these two guys, and I shook my head and said, nope. And they stood up and walked out of the car to the next car. This woman was completely oblivious to this whole little interaction that had occurred around her. And I felt like, wow, that's such a good lesson, because people get into the commute mode and they turn off their awareness. And it really worries me that, smartphones are the biggest problem we face in society today in terms of awareness. They absolutely rob us of our awareness. But just getting on autopilot happens to everybody. We all do it. And awareness requires us to stop and pay attention to what's happening around us right now. It's not about getting my shoes off when I get to the house and getting my feet up and, none of that. I'm not thinking about the future. I'm not thinking about yesterday. And I had this conversation with my boss. I should have really said, oh, man, I'm mad that I didn't stand up for myself. I should have said this. I should have said that. And in all of that, and doing all of that past and future focus, we lose track of what's going on around us. It happens to everyone. You say everyone has some degree of monitoring of the baseline. Well, it's a function. To be able to walk down the sidewalk, you have to know not to trip on the cracks. Right. There are people who have the very, very most basic awareness. But now and again, you see someone on a smartphone walk into a telephone pole, and you realize, that doesn't even help. They don't even have that level of awareness.
So let me ask kind of a weird question here. It's going back to kind of the concept of concentric rings. Is it possible for the diversions that are created by an iPhone to create kind of its own individual negative concentric ring? I don't even know if I said that right, but it would seem to me like the phone itself creates like a micro environment that more or less puts people in situational danger just by its very existence. It
does. I have a hard and fast rule, which is when I am in a public place, my phone stays in my pocket. If I have to stop and text somebody, or if I get a phone call, I step into a corner, into a recess somewhere where I have my back against a wall, and I make the conversation. And I keep my eyes up, and I don't try not to get carried away. That's a hard and fast rule for me. No use of phone in public places. When I'm alone, when I'm in my car, when I'm in a hotel room, when I'm in my house, fine. That's great. That's the time and place for it. But if you want to stay aware, you cannot use your phone.
These conversations sound as though, there's going to be people that are going to listen to it and go, oh, that's, hyping it up. It's all Chicken Little stuff. It doesn't really go on that much. I don't feel that insecure because I live in a great neighborhood, blah, 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 blah. But I would think it would be a pretty safe bet, Kevin, that on any given day, in any given mall parking lot, in any given city of America, somebody is staking that parking lot out for the purposes of, particularly on the holidays, creating a crime. And I think that we kind of fall into this false illusion that because we're in a great neighborhood, that these things never occur here, or we're in a church, there's not going to be a shooting there, or we're going to go to the mall on Black Friday or whatever the case may be, and I'm not going to witness, a horrendous shootout or whatever the case may be. But I think that there's a lot of folks out there that do not understand the extent of the threat and realize that I would imagine on almost any given day, and this, by the way, is a purely subjective question or subjective response, but I would imagine on any given day, every single one of us probably comes in touch or in contact or in the vicinity of a potential threat a half a dozen, if not more times.
Yeah, I don't know any numbers on that, but I certainly believe it's true. Because I pay attention when I'm out in the public, I see setups like that woman on the train who never knew, and she never knew what happened. And, there's a lot of people who pass by near misses and don't have any idea that they've been targeted or could have been targeted. And just by virtue of the person stepping one direction versus another, they didn't get victimized. So, the whole idea here is, how do you figure out what the baseline is, and how do you orient yourself to it? And that's what I guess kind of the next topic is. What are the giveaways that something is happening in the baseline?
I would imagine that if you're in an area that you're familiar with, you probably, like our own home, for example, you probably have a good idea of what the baseline is. But if you're in a foreign area, I mean, how do we set that baseline if it's a unique or very rare place for us to be in?
Well, you have to. Every neighborhood has a different baseline, and you have to learn how to monitor the baseline for that neighborhood. So it takes a few minutes of orientation in a neighborhood to figure out what the baseline is. But after you move a little bit, for example, when we do a class, my urban class in Philadelphia, we go into Chinatown, and there is a definite baseline for Chinatown: noise, activity level, social distancing, volume of speech, pace of speech, gestures. All the people who are in that area have a very unique baseline. You cross over Market Street to Chestnut, which is a predominantly African-American neighborhood, a predominantly black neighborhood, and it's a completely different baseline. They move at a different pace and speech patterns. Everything is different. And you move to the convention center, and it's all tourists, and they have a very different set of baselines. And it's very interesting, actually, that the tourists of anyone are the most aware of anyone. When I see a tourist, their eyes are open, they're looking around, they're seeing stuff for the first time. They're not in that rut. They're not in that routine that kills their awareness. One of the big awareness killers that we'll talk about today is routine. Always doing things the same way, going on autopilot, turning off your awareness, focusing on other things. How many of us get up in the morning, and go into the bathroom and use a toilet, then take a shower, and then shave, and then brush our teeth, and then go put toast in the toaster, and we do it the same way every day. Well, that it makes sense, and it's efficient, and it's important in order to be efficient that you do that. But when you do that outside of your home, on your way to work, you drive the same route. You never vary anything. You always stop at the newsstand and get a newspaper. You always stop for coffee at the same place, same time. You create a routine that allows you to think of other things rather than what's going on around you. So the routine becomes an awareness killer as well. So I talk about smartphones. I talk about routine. I talk about the tapes that play in your head about yesterday and tomorrow, and those are all critical to understand and learn how to control, so that you don't end up in an oblivious state where you either walk into telephone poles or you walk without any awareness of the people who are coming up behind you, or whatever their intention is. I have seen it on the street so many times, and I spent a lot of time in urban areas walking on the streets in the process of teaching my classes over the last 15 years, and I have seen so many things that give away a lack of awareness. And it's gotten really bad in the last 5 years with the advent of the smartphone. But smartphone is a criminal's dream.
You're talking about the distraction that it creates.
The distraction that it creates. It creates a complete, like you said, it's an encapsulation. You become part of the phone environment instead of the urban environment that you're standing in. So anyway, if this is making sense, I'll continue with other keys to awareness.
It's making perfect sense to me. I think one of the things that that I wanted to make certain we got to today was just making people situationally aware that they need to be aware of what's going on around them at all time. Because like you, I'm one of those kind of people. I carry a weapon. I'm very experienced, and like I said, in boating and in hiking, and I almost to a degree kind of wonder if people that are kind of outdoorsy might even have a predisposition towards observing the baseline, because if you take your eyes off the baseline on the water doing 45 miles an hour, that's potentially deadly. And so there's a lot of people out there, you can't just go through the motions when you're manhandling a 30, 35-foot boat, or you're going down a craggy cliff with a loaded shotgun on your back. And so, I think a lot of people out there, if they were exposed to those situations that force you to be situationally aware, or else they might be a little bit more apt to do so in their public life. So, no, it's making perfect sense to me, and I want to bring more awareness to that.
Well, we have a joke about the wilderness side of it, and that is that we live in a world with that, in the wilderness for the most part without predators. But if you go camping in an area that has a lot of bears, for example, you go up into Montana or into Glacier National Park, and they're a grizzly bear, and they prey on humans occasionally, not often, but they do. Your awareness goes through the roof. I had a situation many years ago where I had to track a tiger in an urban environment, in a suburban environment. And the tiger was a Class A predator. I mean, he was out of his element, and I was a little nervous, I have to admit. Here we are tracking a tiger in the woods of New Jersey. Man, my awareness was on high because I knew the predator was there. I have to tell you that you will encounter predators every day, two-legged variety, and your level of awareness is what will keep you from becoming a victim of those guys. I make it sound like there's a mugger on every corner, and obviously that isn't the case. But there are people that move in our cities, we call them Oppurtunivores. They're just looking for the opportunity to prey upon somebody. And the Oppurtunivores hang out, watch, observe. Their awareness is very high. And they're looking for the easy mark that doesn't have any awareness. And who's so absorbed with whatever they're either in their head absorbed, or they're absorbed with their electronic device, or whatever it is. So
are you suggesting then that these predators on the street are, by definition, more situationally aware than the average person?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, see, that's scary.
Otherwise, well, yeah, because if they're not careful with this, then they end up in jail. So their situational awareness tends to be very high. They're paying attention to where law enforcement is. They're paying attention to where the ambush sites are that work best. And so, they're very aware. What helps? There's a lot of ways to look at this. So I'm talking about personal protection against a predator, but I also want to talk about being aware of developing situations like the parking lot incident you described, because there is danger in a mob situation, and it doesn't happen often, but it does happen, and that is easily determined by watching the baseline movement of people. When you see somebody, if you're walking down the sidewalk in a given neighborhood, and all of a sudden a guy comes by that's going twice as fast as everybody else, that is a movement pattern that would cause me to pay attention. What's this guy doing? Is he running from somebody? Is he running after somebody? What's the situation? And so if I see somebody who's going against the flow, going upstream on a downstream area, for example, coming off a subway, where all the people are exiting, if someone's coming onto the subway through the exit, that kind of thing worries me. That may cause me to pay attention. We have what we call a collapsing circle, and you see this a lot in the city. I remember one day walking in Philly and seeing all these people rushing into a given point, and they're rushing from all directions. And when you see that, there's usually one thing that is indicative of, and that is a fight, some kind of confrontation. People rush up with their cell phones in their hands, over their head, getting video for YouTube. And I saw this, and I approached the area. I stood at a corner where I could easily step behind the concrete building, and I observed. And what was happening was a fight between a bike messenger and a guy in a car, and it played out in front of me very interestingly. And 5, 7, 8 minutes of that, and there was a crowd of several hundred people. It probably wasn't that long. It was probably about 3 minutes. But there was a crowd of several hundred people standing in a circle. And from 2 blocks away, I could see this developing. Now, usually in a situation like that, my response is go the opposite direction. I had done a presentation in Los Angeles once in a big warehouse, and after the presentation, they cranked up the music and people started dancing. And I don't like big crowds. I tend to avoid them. I don't like to go to places where there's a large number of people, because that is such a chaotic environment. So I'm standing over by the fire escape. That's kind of where I was hanging out, and the guy who was running the event came over, and we started chatting, And all of a sudden we could see this collapsing circle where everybody was running in with their cell phones, and I said, you got to fight. You got to fight over there. He goes, oh, man. You know, and I said, just hold on a second, because I think it's going to break up pretty quick. And all of a sudden, that circle exploded into what we call a bombshell, where everybody ran in a different direction. It's the opposite of the collapsing circle. And that movement pattern said, and I said to him, I said, someone just drew a knife or a gun. And sure enough, the two guys had gotten into a fight over a girl, and one guy drew a gun, and police were called, but you know, everybody scattered as soon as they saw that gun. That bombshell, that's a really common event, and that pinpoints the point of the event. So if there's a person with a gun or a knife or whatever, people will tend to bombshell away from that. And so you can pinpoint the location of the disturbance of the concentric ring based on the movement pattern of the people. Are they moving in towards an event? Are they moving away from an event? Are they moving faster than normal? Are they moving slower than normal? All those movement patterns are indicative of a situation that's happening. So part of the monitoring of the baseline is looking at movement patterns. And paying attention to what people are doing in terms of their movement. Anything abnormal deserves a look. You got to take a look at it.
Right. Well, so, it kind of goes back to what you and I talked about, you know, last time in Birmingham, Alabama, where, you know, there was this mall shooting that created a very chaotic scene. And it was the way people were moving. And again, I'm speculating here, Kevin, but, you know, we had a young man that was shot by this police, and he was killed, and he was shot by a police officer. And this is a pending case, so I don't want to comment on it any more than to say that it is the disturbance in this particular baseline and the accompanying confusion that may very well have exacerbated and escalated this situation into something more than it necessarily had to be. Again, that's purely speculation on my part, but I think it really goes to underscore the fact because, again, I think there's too many people in the world that are going, well, you know, this all seems extreme, and, you know, on the Friday, or you know, right after the Thursday of Thanksgiving evening, there was a lot of people sitting around eating a turkey that are thinking to themselves, well, you know, if they'd heard this program, well, that's never going to happen to me. And then yet hours later, here we are. And you know, so I think people need to be very aware of that situation.
Yeah, for sure. The chances of anything happening to you are very small, and the less aware you are, the greater those chances become. So it's a question of whether you want to take that risk or not. I personally don't. Now, the shooting that you're describing sounds like one of the concerns I have about carrying a weapon is if there's an event and I use my weapon, I don't want to be mistaken for the actual shooter and taken down myself. And so you have to make some really hard decisions about how to deal with those events. So you have to, you know, I mean, I don't have an answer for every event, but I certainly would be very careful to use my weapon in a big public space.
Okay, well, let me stop you. Let me stop you right there, because the very first time that, you know, after this event happened, the very next week, the next Friday, we did a situational security program just like this, and I brought in a pastor who has written a book on Christians and carrying guns, another guy that's a Second Amendment expert, and then somebody else that's actually a writer for the United States Concealed Carry Association magazine. Her name is Beth. And Beth and I were talking on the air, and we were talking about this very event, and her response to that was, had I been in this situation, and this girl was extremely accomplished. You know, these are people that run with, you know, Jan Morgan and people like that, you know, the Gun Owners of America, the Pratt family and whatnot. So anyway, she makes the comment to me that I would not have drawn my weapon. I would have been looking for the way out. And until my body and my children were a direct threat, then I would not have engaged. I am not going to necessarily be heroic for the purposes of injecting myself or inserting myself into this situation all because I carry a gun. Like you and I were talking last time we spoke, law enforcement and first responders have a right to go home at the end of the day too. So does Beth. So she's saying, look, until this becomes a physical threat against me, I am not getting involved with it. With that said, and going back to what you just referenced, if people have an established baseline in this mall and they are situationally aware in this mall, and this event occurs with the police officer shooting the young man who does in fact have a weapon but did not aim it towards the officer, people that are situationally aware and have established a baseline, they're not going to fall into the situation that you just mentioned because they will know enough about what is going on to realize where the threat lies, as opposed to everybody going all cowboy and all of a sudden we got a bunch of crossfire going on. Or am I just wrong about that?
No, you're absolutely right. And my whole approach to that is that I carry a weapon to protect my family. I don't carry it to be John Wayne riding in hot. You know, that's just not what I'm going to do. I had a situation where I was questioned after I was interviewed once after the Aurora theater shooting. And the guy says, well, if you had a gun and you were in that theater, what would you have done? I said my first priority would have been to get my family out of the theater. If that meant engaging, then that's what I would have to do. But my priority is not to run in and shoot this guy. That's what the police get paid to do. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to get my family out safely. And it's the same thing that your friend was saying with you in your interview is use your weapon to protect your family. Now, what you said is a really good segue for the next aspect of awareness, which is spatial orientation. It's knowing where you are in relation to potential threats, to exits, and everything else. So I have a process of what I do to try and stay. There's a very good book, and it was written by a Marine called Left of Bang. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not. I highly recommend the book. It is one of the best awareness books you will ever read. And I've been teaching this for about almost 25 years. And when I read it, I went, well, this guy obviously has been to some place. He was either at tracker school when I was there, or he came and took a class at Oppurtunivores, because a lot of what he's talking about in terms of monitoring the baseline came from this stuff. I mean, I don't want to take credit for it, but I want to give him credit and say it's a great book. But what he talks a lot about are pre-event indicators. He's talking about it from a military perspective. You know, he says if you're on the street, for example, in Iraq, in Baghdad, and all of a sudden there are no women and children on the street, that's a pre-event indicator. That indicates something is going to happen. And he goes into a lot of military applications of pre-event indicators. So I just want to always look at the baseline. What is the baseline telling me about the presence of predators? And where am I relative to the predators? And how do I remove myself from the equation? I do not want to engage. I'm sorry. I'm all about protecting my family, and that's why I carry the weapon. But if I'm given a choice, my preference is to leave the shooting to the police officers and get my family out. So what I do when I enter an area for the first time is I scan. I do a room scan. For example, I walk into a dinner, a hotel ballroom dinner for an award ceremony. We'll use that as an example. I'm in a big group. I hate big groups, so I'm already on edge. I look for the exits. First first scan is, where are the exits? I try and do this anytime I enter a building, anytime I enter a room. It's where are the exits? Where are the doors? What windows could be broken? What ways do I have to get out of this situation? I always take the time, and sitting in a movie theater before the movie starts, to literally identify the exit.
So you kind of create your own little egress code.
Mm-hmm. I have this. So first step is scanning for exits. The second element, the second layer of the scan, is structural elements that provide cover. By that I mean protection from fire. So is there a concrete pillar that I could get behind if someone was shooting? And again, people will say this is over the top, and it is for a lot of people. I mean, most people probably wouldn't need to do this, but if you're in the security business, then this is really important stuff. So scan for exits, scan for structural cover. And where am I relative to the exits? Where am I relative to the cover? I like to stay close. Whenever my buddies and I go out to dinner or to eat, we always have a joke about who gets to sit in the gunfighter seat, which is who has their back to the wall and their face to the entrance so that they can see what's going on. I don't trust people to do that unless I know they have high level of awareness. So when we go out, we kind of jostle, argue a little bit about it in a joking way. So scan the room for exits, scan the room for cover, and then the third scan is, and I'm doing it all at once, but I'm just talking about it in terms of layers for understanding, is threat assessment. Is there any obvious threat in the room? Who looks like they might be either suspicious? I always look for people who are furtive and not, who are trying to hide their behaviors, or some other kind of obvious threat. Is there I remember going into a wing restaurant in New Jersey and looking down and seeing a table full of bikers. And they were all wearing Mongol colors. And I went, there's an obvious threat. And then I scanned the room and I saw another table that had about 3 police officers out of uniform, but I could tell they were police officers. I thought, well, this is interesting. I wonder what's going on here. There's some kind of out of baseline thing here. So who are the obvious threats and who are the more subtle threats? The bikers in colors were obvious threats. The off-duty police officers were far less obvious. Maybe not that much, but they're a little bit more subtle. So exits, cover, threats. That's my level. Then the next level is resources. What is available to me in this room that I might need in the event of an event? Is there something I can turn into a weapon if I don't have a weapon with me? Can I break a leg off a table and hit somebody with it? Can I put some salt shakers in a sock and use it as a weapon? Can I, so improvised weapons. I'm looking for things that I can break there's a flag in the corner. I can break the pole off the base of that and use it as a weapon. I'm also looking for other resources. Is there a first aid kit in the room? Is there an automatic electronic defibrillator mounted in the wall? Is there water? Is there food? What could I use as a stretcher? Could I use that table to haul somebody out? I know it seems a little over the top, but this is from when you work in the security field. You have to think about it from the perspective of I'm coming under attack, and so this is Kevin, my room.
I would imagine that once people start practicing this level of observance, that what you described, not only becomes very intuitive, but also becomes momentary because you walk into a room and, once you're experienced and you're paying attention and you're situationally aware and you're establishing baselines, everything you just described to us is probably a thought process that goes down in a matter of moments. And so it's not necessarily so, chronologically burdensome where, people might be thinking, well, this guy just sits down and looks, scans the entire room. No, you're walking into a room and you're probably making all these assessments in less than a minute or two.
Oh yeah, very much so. It's an instantaneous habitual thing, and it takes some time to develop, and it can drive the people around you crazy. I have friends who go, "Would you just stop? Just noting this, just paying attention to that." And you're right. It's once I walk into the room, I make that assessment. Then I can relax. I can sit where I can observe, and I can continue to just do my whatever my task is or whatever my situation is. I can continue with that without having to worry about it. But I have already made those assessments because trying to make them after the event, that's going to be really hard. Which way is the exit? There's a great book out there that I read years ago called The Survivor's Club by a guy named Sherwood. And he talks about how when there is an emergency, he uses airplanes as an example. He says when there's an emergency, people will always go to the exit that they came into. So if they entered the plane through the front left exit, that's where they go to get out. They always do that. That's almost like 90% of the time. Why? Because they really haven't taken the time to familiarize themselves with other options. They don't know where the other exits are. So if there's a shooting in a theater, everybody runs for the door that they came into. And if you take that moment when you enter the building, when you enter the room, to just observe all the exits, then you have options. You don't have to give in to that instinctive reaction to go out the way you came in. So there's some logic to it. It's not insanity to do that. It makes a good deal of sense to me.
Well, it would seem to me that you were mentioning earlier making toast and things like that, and our normal routine, that even the way we deal with our own personal safety and security at any given time is also to a degree habitual. In other words, you walked in this particular door, so you're automatically going to exit that door. And sometimes it's something as simple as just, Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker, used to call them pattern interrupts, where we interrupt our normal way of doing things to think a little bit differently. And, and it's so funny, and I'll liken it to this past weekend. Actually, it's every weekend, but my wife and I, we go to church, and we go to a church that's it's a large church, Kevin. It's probably got, 1,500, 2,000 people, in our congregation on any given Sunday. And when the service is over, everybody turns and they go out the back door. And you might be standing in the line, and I'm not exaggerating, 7, 8, 9 minutes to get out of the sanctuary. But up by where the stage is, there's an exit door to the right and the left where nobody's going out, and it goes to the same parking lot.
Right. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. And a lot of the structure in our culture, in our society, is designed to channelize you. It's designed to force you to do, you think away, even something as simple as the way parking lots are designed. They're designed to make you go a certain way and to not give you too many options. And that's a great example. I love that example of everybody lining up to go out the door they came in because that's what they're comfortable with. And so how do you interrupt the patterns? Tony Robbins' pattern interrupters are a great example of the kinds of things I'm talking about in terms of developing awareness. And so one of the things that, when I first started learning this, I thought, well, I don't want to do routine. I want to break routine. So I'm going to take a different route to work every day. And that lasted for about 2 weeks before my route had gone from 30-minute commute to 45-minute commute to an hour commute because I was going all these different And I realized that wasn't practical. I have to do the same routine every day. I just have to choose to find something new on that route every day. And so every day I go, look, there's a house I've never noticed before. Or, you know what, there's a traffic camera right here. I never noticed that before. And so once I started paying attention, even if I was doing the same routine, just by paying attention, I started to see new things on that route every day. And so it doesn't have to be, the pattern interrupters can just be, hey, check that out. I never noticed that before. Check that out. I never noticed that before. And once you start doing that, you're going to go, wow, I have driven up and down this street for the last 10 years on my way to work and back, and I never noticed that. How is that possible? And that's when you start to recognize how patterned you have become. And, you know,
you're right, because that actually happened to me, believe it or not, just yesterday on a route that I have taken to work every day for the last 6 or 7 years, and for the first time, there was a particular house that I noticed. And I'm like, how long is it? And the house is, and the funny thing is that I grew up in the neighborhood that I currently live in. So this is not only a house that I passed the last 4 or 5 years, it's a house that I probably have been passing the last 35 years, but I never noticed it before. And to kind of give an example, this particular road it's residential, obviously, but it's on top of a mountain. And so it's very scenic in the drive, and in the valley down, you know, it's so beautiful and so breathtaking that you spend so much time looking at the valley that you didn't notice what's going on the peak. And I didn't realize that until you even just said it a moment ago. We are sometimes so enamored with, whether it's an iPhone or the valley, the shiny stuff, and yet we don't notice the things that could potentially be a threat.
Yeah, my Green Beret buddy always talks about, ooh, it's shiny, and it's his sarcastic observation that people just go for the shiny stuff. Why we have people, we have secondary accidents on the freeway because people are ogling the accident and don't see the car in front of them. And in fact, you know, one of the aspects in some of the military training we do is, when you pick an ambush site, pick an area that has what we call a focus lock, that someone walks around a corner on a trail and there's this beautiful scene, and their attention is focused on the scene, and that's where you set the ambush. So, you know, this concept of using terrain for your advantage in a tactical situation has to do a lot with noting what people pay attention to. So anyway, I mean, that's kind of the opposite end of what we're talking about. We're talking about the application to awareness, but you know, the concept is the same. Is that what is it that kills awareness? There are three things I say that are the biggest awareness killers. One is the smartphone. The second is complacency or routine. Rut is a better word for it. Getting it into a routine and not doing anything to disrupt those patterns. Those pattern disruptors are really important.
Right.
And the third thing is something that Sherwood identified in that book, The Survivors Club. It's called normalcy bias. And normalcy bias is an inability to adjust to a new paradigm. Because it's always been a certain way, it's always going to be a certain way. And it's really hard to get people to break out of that complacency, to get out of that normalcy bias. Now, I had occasion to have, I have a good friend that is retired from Delta Force, a retired guy. He spent about 16 or 17 years as a member of one of the units, and we were having dinner in LA one time, and I asked him, what was the most important thing you learned as a Delta operator? What was the thing that they taught you, that they drummed into you, that they reinforced every day? And he says, oh, that's easy. He says, every single day we were drummed, drilled, and taught that movement is life. And I said, well, what does that mean? I don't understand. He says, almost every situation you're ever in is improved by moving. So in the event of an event, when the event actually occurs, the best thing you can do is move. And I said, gosh, I'm not sure I'm catching. I don't quite understand. He goes, look, battles are won because of initiative. When you assume a defensive position, he said, you become stagnant. You're not moving. You're not taking initiative. So move. Whatever the situation, move. I go, really? He goes, almost every situation. And he gave me 3 or 4 examples of situations he was in where movement was the right thing because he was taking the initiative, he was taking the battle to the person, or he was moving his family out of danger, moving his unit out of danger. It was all about movement. And I've thought about that a lot since then, and I've adopted that as my mantra as well. Movement is life. And I know that may be esoteric, but if you give it some thought, it will start to become very practical. So the best way to overcome normalcy bias is to move.
It makes an enormous amount of sense to me. It really and truly does.
People frozen in the reality of where their brain is trying to accept the new situation. You see it in YouTube videos all the time. I remember watching a YouTube video of a guy at an ATM, and he's at the ATM, and there's 5 people waiting in line, and this gunman comes running up and draws his weapon on the guy at the ATM. The guy at the ATM spins around a pillar and draws his own weapon, and there's this gunfight going on at this ATM. And what do the 5 people in line do? The 5
I imagine
people
they
in
watched.
line, they stood there watching.
Yeah.
It's like, but they had this shocked look on their face, like, and that's the thing I'm talking about, where movement is life. Get the heck out of there.
Right.
I don't want to get in the crossfire.
You're exactly right. Kevin, unfortunately, we're about out of time for this segment. I knew you'd knock it out of the park, as you always do. If people want to learn more about your classes and On Point Tactical and all the great things about Kevin Reeve, tell us where we can find out more.
OnPointTactical.com. One word, On Point Tactical. My phone number is 609-668-5384. Happy to take calls. 609-668-5384. So go on the website, give me a call, and we'll see how we can help you.
Absolutely. Again, it's On Point Tactical. This is Kevin Reeve with On Point, and you can reach Kevin at 609-668-5384. Kevin, love to do this again in about a month or so if you're up for it.
I'm up for it.
Great. I'll be in touch, and you know how to reach me as well.
Very good. We'll do it.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. We'll talk to you very soon. Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. All right, guys, again, check him out at onpointtactical.com. That's onpointtactical.com. This has been the Situational Security edition of the program, brought to you in part by our good friends over at Liberty One Tech. I cannot say enough about Liberty One Tech. Do you know them? Well, you do if you know our longtime friend of the program, Tolly. Yes, when we say that the Michael Hart Show and Situational Security is brought to you in part by Liberty One Tech, we mean literally. Whether you're watching live or listening to the podcast later, Liberty One Tech is connecting the digital pipes of the Internet together to make this broadcast possible. There are so many other things that we are going to be adding to it, in addition to an upcoming brand new podcast that deals with those of you that love the outdoors and land as well. We're going to be planning that out in the very, very near future, and Liberty One Tech will certainly play a role in that as well. So whether or not you're listening to the Unknown America broadcast, the Michael Hart Show, and then there's that, or Situational Security on Friday, Liberty One Tech can help you as well. So again, check them out. It's Liberty, the number one, tech.com. And also for those of you that are interested in learning all about American history and all the stupid stuff that the kids are being taught in school that's completely BS and a lie, go and check out theunknownamerica.com. It's part of the Unknown America Project. We're calling it that because we're working on the second edition, the third edition, the children's edition, and the board game. So there are so many ways to support the program. Again, you can support the program on the Patreon account by supporting the book project or any way, shape, or form so that we can continue to bring you this level of broadcasting right here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network. That's it for us. Go check out the book again at theunknownamerica.com. We'll be back with you live Monday at 8. You've been listening to the Situational Security Program brought to you by Liberty One Tech, the Unknown America Project, and the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. Talk to you Monday. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye now. America and the Michael Hart Show is brought to you in part by the Unknown America Project. Unknown America Myths and Little-Known Oddities about the greatest nation on earth explores many of the falsehoods and fallacies and revisions in American history that impact the beliefs and the thoughts of many people in this country today. So if you'd like to learn some of the most enduring myths that have been perpetrated on the American public for the last 100-plus years in this country, go check out the book at heartofamerica.net. That's heartofamerica.net. And pick up a copy of Unknown America. It comes out to you absolutely no shipping, and be autographed, and we'll even send you a copy of the United States Constitution as our way of saying thanks. So support the Unknown America Project by simply going to theunknownamerica.com, and thank you for your support.